Welcome to the Global Discourse.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving deep into a question we know is on many minds. Is Vietnam actually becoming the next economic tiger in Southeast Asia?
It's a fascinating question.
You, our listener, sent in a really rich collection of materials, reports, academic articles, detailed analyses. We've spent time sifting through it all to pull out the crucial insights.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
So our mission today is exactly that. Unpack Vietnam's, well, frankly, remarkable economic boom. We want to understand its foundations, pinpoint the challenges it's facing.
And figure out if it truly stands poised to, roar as a new tiger economy.
Exactly. Okay, let's get into it. Where do we even start? The transformation itself seems staggering.
It really is. I mean, if you look back, the sources paint a picture of Vietnam in the mid-1980s as, well, a largely backward agricultural country.
Right at the start of IMO, their renovation period, facing food shortages, serious poverty.
Precisely. And IMU really appears to be the catalyst.
It seems like it. The sources really hammer home how liberalizing markets, allowing private firms, integrating globally.
And critically, attracting that high level of foreign direct investment, FDI.
That combination just spurred significant growth and, importantly, productivity gains.
The numbers back that up strongly. You look at real GDP growth averaging, 7.4% between 1991 and 2009. That's huge.
And the impact on individuals' GDP per capita, it went from just 98 USD in 1990, among the world's poorest,
Unbelievably low, yeah.
to over $1,100 by 2009, hitting that lower middle income status. And then just look at 2023, almost $4,500.
And that's in constant 2023 dollars, so adjusted for inflation, a massive leap.
And it's not just abstract growth, is it? The poverty reduction numbers are really striking.
Absolutely key. The share of the population living on less than $3.65 a day.
And that's the 2017 PPP figure, right? Purchasing power parity, so it reflects actual local costs.
Exactly. That figure plummeted from 14% in 2010 down to under 4% in 2023.
Wow. In a little over a decade, that's life-changing for millions.
It truly is. And the momentum seems to be continuing, mostly. GDP grew by 7.1% in 2024.
Though there's a forecast dip, right, to maybe 5.8% in 2025?
Yes, a slight moderation expected, but then bouncing back, potentially, to 6.1% in 2026. The overall picture is still strong.
It explains why the World Bank, as one source notes, calls it a remarkable development success story.
You really can't argue with that description based on the headline figures.
Okay, so the transformation is clear, but what's driving it? What are the engines behind this boom, according to the materials?
Well, several key drivers stand out. First and foremost, it seems to be an export-led growth model.
Supported by industrialization, building up that export capacity.
Right. They started, with lower value-added stuff like the sewing industry.
Basic manufacturing.
But they've managed a shift towards higher value-added products, like smartphones, electronics. That's a significant change.
And FDI, foreign direct investment, that seems absolutely pivotal in the analyses.
Oh, a major catalyst, no doubt. Vietnam just became very attractive. Strategic location, stable socio-political environment. That's a big plus for investors.
And seen as an alternative to China, maybe, for Western, Japanese, EU investors.
That definitely plays a role, especially more recently. The inflows really started picking up after the foreign investment law back in '87.
Peaked in '96, and then again after joining the WTO in 2007.
Yes, those were key moments. And even now, it's still running at, 5% of GDP or maybe more? That's substantial.
And then there's the whole integration piece, joining ASEAN, the WTO, and signing all those free trade agreements, FTAs.
So many FTAs. The TPP originally, now the CPTPP, as in China, as in Korea, EU Vietnam, UK Vietnam. The list goes on.
And these aren't just pieces of paper, right? The sources suggest they really facilitated technology transfer, boosted productivity.
Absolutely. They opened doors, connected Vietnam to global markets, and crucially, global value chains.
Which leads to that other point, Vietnam becoming this shifting production hub.
Yeah, that's been a big trend since around 2009. More and more companies, especially big names in electronics, Samsung, Intel, Foxconn.
Moving production there. And the U.S.-China trade conflict really poured fuel on that fire, didn't it?
It certainly accelerated things.
Yeah.
And it's created this specific trade structure for Vietnam, importing intermediate goods, often from China.
And then assembling or finishing them and exporting the final products, a lot going to the U.S.
Exactly. It's a specific role in the supply chain.
Now, something else that jumped out from one study, dated 2025, was the emphasis on education investment.
Yes, that was interesting. It found a clear, positive impact of social investment in education on economic prosperity, both short and long run, looking at data from 1998 to 2023.
And it mentioned a fast adjustment speed, back to equilibrium after shocks.
Yeah, 83.1%. That suggests a certain resilience. The study also had clear policy advice. Boost education budgets, improve labor quality through vocational training.
And better cooperation between businesses and education providers.
Makes sense. And other data backs this up. Universal primary education achieved early on. High secondary enrollment.
And learning-adjusted schooling years, basically quality-adjusted, second only to Singapore and ASEAN. That's impressive.
It is. Highest human capital index among its peer group, lower middle income economies. So education has clearly been a priority and seems to be paying off.
Okay, so we have exports, FDI, global integration, becoming a production hub, and investment in human capital. Sounds like a winning formula.
On the surface, yes. But as always, the sources also highlight significant challenges and risks. It's not all smooth sailing.
Right, let's pivot to those. Because no boom lasts forever without addressing the underlying issues. What's the biggest worry?
One major flag raised repeatedly is the sheer dependence on exports.
That figure of 93.3% of GDP in 2021, that seems incredibly high.
It is exceptionally high, and it makes the economy very vulnerable to external factors. A global slowdown, shifts in demand. Vietnam feels that acutely.
And within that export picture, there are imbalances too, like relying too much on certain products or companies.
Exactly. The electronics sector is huge, but then you see that Samsung sales alone might be around 20% of total exports. That's a big concentration risk.
And the flip side is the reliance on imports for those same industries, right? Raw materials, components, especially from China.
Yes, particularly for electronics. It ties Vietnam's fortunes closely to those supply chains and suppliers.
Another point that comes up is this idea of low value added, even in the big export sectors like garments or electronics.
This is a critical challenge. While export volume is high, the actual value capture within Vietnam can be relatively low.
So lots of assembly and basic manufacturing, but maybe not enough local design, R&D, marketing.
Precisely. Vietnam often occupies the lower rungs of the global value chain ladder, heavily reliant on foreign tech, foreign design, foreign capital. One source even showed value added from manufacturing declining as a percentage of output between 2000 and 2013.
That's worrying if you want to move up. And it connects to labor productivity, doesn't it?
It does. The reports are quite stark here. Labor productivity is still among the lowest in the Asia-Pacific, way behind Singapore, Japan, Korea, even Malaysia and Thailand.
And the growth in productivity has slowed.
Yes, that's another concern, which raises the specter of the middle-income trap.
There's the danger of getting stuck. Growing fast initially due to reforms and catching up, but then plateauing without converging with the richer economies.
Exactly. The argument is that the initial liberalization effect from OMU might be running out of steam. You need new drivers of productivity growth.
Which perhaps requires a better industrial policy. The sources seem quite critical here.
They did. Described as generally poor, lacking coordination, especially in areas like human resource development, supporting domestic firms and linking FDI with local businesses effectively.
Issues mentioned included lack of coordination between central and local government, slow state-owned enterprise reform, corruption.
And just weak processes for actually defining, implementing, and evaluating industrial strategy.
Infrastructure limitations also get flagged. Tertiary education, for instance.
Right. While basic infrastructure like electricity and water access has improved massively.
Higher education still faces hurdles. Low enrollment, variable quality, and that persistent skills mismatch with what employers need.
And then there's urbanization. Rapid growth, but maybe not managed optimally.
The sources mention dispersed, disconnected development, and the Hokkao resident system limiting internal migration.
Yes, that system makes it harder for people to move to cities for work and access services, contributing to labor market inefficiencies and potentially slowing down structural transformation, plus shortages of affordable housing.
Leading to the usual urban problems, just maybe amplified. Inefficiency, congestion traffic, schools, healthcare, and environmental pressures like air pollution.
And the way public finances work, sometimes starving the most productive urban areas of the resources they need to cope with that growth.
And very currently, the power supply issue. Recent outages mentioned.
Yeah, due to heat and low rainfall impacting hydropower. That kind of instability is a real red flag for manufacturers who rely on consistent power. It could definitely deter future investment if it persists.
Okay, so a fair few challenges there. Dependence, low value add, productivity, policy weaknesses, infrastructure, urban issues, power. But the sources don't just list problems, do they? They also suggest ways forward.
Absolutely. There's a clear focus on pathways to more sustainable growth, to actually becoming that tiger.
Like shifting towards higher value added industries. That phrase, high tech projects that do not cause environmental pollution, stood out.
Yes, a focus on quality, not just quantity, and sustainability. Also, diversifying risks, moving away from dependence on just a few export items or markets.
Makes sense. And stabilizing that power supply is obviously crucial.
Non-negotiable for a manufacturing hub.
And that recurring theme, investing more and perhaps smarter in education and skills.
Continuously improving labor quality, focusing on vocational training, better business education links, and tackling those tertiary education challenges. It's fundamental for moving up the value chain.
Implementing a much more effective strategic industrial policy also seems key based on the analysis.
Yes, moving beyond just letting things happen. Selective government interventions, but done well. Addressing market failures, promoting new activities, setting clear benchmarks.
Fostering real collaboration between government and the private sector, and building strong, clean institutions, maybe learning from neighbors like Taiwan, South Korea, China.
The idea of guided markets, but adapted for Vietnam's context and avoiding the pitfalls.
And tackling those urban challenges head on. Better planning, maybe reforming the Hoka system to help labor mobility.
Expanding affordable housing, improving fiscal planning for cities, investing strategically in urban infrastructure in the key economic hubs.
What about linking FDI better into the local economy, creating real clusters?
That's crucial. Making sure FDI isn't just an island, but creates linkages forward and backward with domestic firms, boosting overall productivity. Even using state-owned enterprises, if managed well and without corruption, to help build these clusters.
And finally, maintaining that sound macroeconomic management.
Yeah, keeping deficits and foreign debt in check, especially debt in foreign currency. Having an exchange rate policy that supports competitiveness, maybe using tools like managed floating rates or even capital controls judiciously.
Okay, let's try and synthesize this. Stepping back, Vietnam's journey is undeniably impressive, isn't it?
Remarkable, as the World Bank said. From where it started to a major player in global manufacturing and exports. FDI, global integration, education focuses, they built a strong foundation.
But the path to becoming a true tiger economy looks, well, challenging. Significant hurdles remain.
Definitely. That reliance on lower value-added manufacturing within global chains, the infrastructure gaps, the urban pressures, the need for a smarter, cleaner industrial policy, these are major areas to address.
And this is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. The sources present this tension, don't they, between the fantastic headline growth and these underlying structural weaknesses. Are the current drivers sustainable, especially with global uncertainties and the need to climb that value ladder?
The focus on education and the potential for a more strategic industrial policy offer some hope, perhaps, for deeper, more resilient growth.
They offer potential pathways, yes, but execution is everything.
So what's the bottom line for Vietnam's future? Can it escape that middle-income trap and really challenge the established Asian economies?
The analysis suggests the potential is absolutely there, but it hinges on making some tough strategic policy choices and implementing them effectively.
It's not automatic. Sustained high growth, transitioning to higher value added. It requires real shifts in industrial strategy, urban development, and leveraging global integration more deeply, not just as an assembly platform.
It's a complex story, as you said. Impressive achievements, but considerable challenges ahead. Vietnam is genuinely at a crossroads. Its future path really depends on the choices made in the next few years. Now, reflecting on all this, what really stands out to you? What questions does this deep dive raise about Vietnam's potential to become that next economic tiger?